against God. Shock horror. And we'll kick off with a question, okay, which is this. Which political movement today in Israel would you define as anti-religious? Which political movement today would you define as anti-religious? Please text me on WhatsApp or in the chat, and I will give an instant response to your comments, because we are in the days of social interaction. And whilst you're doing that, I shall talk a little bit. And I'm going to talk about Nimrod. Who was he? Well, we know about Nimrod from chapter 10 of Bereshit, where it's written, V'kush yalad et Nimrod, hu hechel liot gibor ba'aretz. Okay, Cush was the father of Nimrod. Cush was the son of Ham, who was the son of Noah. So Nimrod was the, like my calculation says, Nimrod was the great-grandson of Noah. Hu haya gibor tzad lifnei Hashem. He was a mighty hunter. And V'tihi reshit mamlachto Bavel. Okay, and a few others as well. But one of his kingdoms, one of his major cities in his kingdoms was Babylon. Okay, so what do we learn from that? So Rashi says, Gibor Tzad, a mighty hunter. Tzad daton shel brit bepiv umatan limrod b'makom. Okay, he was a mighty hunter. What did he do? He ensnared the minds of the people by his words, misleading them to rebel against Hashem. So he believed in Hashem, okay, and he would trap people. He tried to rebel against Hashem, and he would trap other people to do that with him. And al ken yoma al kol adam marshia ba'azut panim yodea ribono umitkaven limrod bo yoma ze kenimrod gibor tzad. So regarding any man who brazenly acts wickedly, I think this is, in fact, this is one of the al-chetz that we just said. Okay, he knows Hashem, and yet he sets purpose in rebelling against him. It is said, this man is like Nimrod, a mighty hunter. Nimrod, the root of which is mered, rebellion against Hashem. And if we have Nimrod on the side, on the bad side, on the good side, of course, we have Avraham, and their famous confrontation is described in the Midrash Rabbah. And I'll read that just in English. He, Avraham, was given over to Nimrod. Nimrod told him, worship the fire. And Avraham said to him, shall I then worship the water, which puts off the fire? And Nimrod told him, worship the water. And Avraham said to him, if so, shall I worship the cloud, which carries the water? And Nimrod told him, worship the cloud. And Avraham said to him, if so, shall I worship the wind, which scatters the clouds? And Nimrod said to him, worship the wind. And Avraham said to him, and shall we worship the human who withstands the wind? Said Nimrod to him, you pile words upon words. I bow to none but the fire, and in it I shall throw you, and let the God to whom you bow come and save you from it. And of course, Nimrod throws Avraham into the fire, and he's miraculously saved, unlike his brother Haran, who is devoured by the fire. But Nimrod is a symbol of bad things, of rebellion, and hence, I don't think, I hope not, but anyway, we don't, I was going to make a comment about grandsons, but I won't, just in case. But generally, religious people do not call their children Nimrod, although that's perhaps not the case in the non-religious world, and there are lots of Nimrods floating around. Okay, which political movement do you define as anti-religious? We only have one response. Pretty poor. Thank you, Barbara. One response, so you have a picture here of Yair Lapid, of course. I didn't want to suggest anything. Barbara says Yisrael Beitenu, which was another possibility, of course. You could have said Meretz. You could have probably said, I don't know, the Labour Party even. But generally, if we're talking about anti-religious, we would have to use the dreaded word small. Okay, sorry about that. But if I asked you the same question in 1939, what political movement would you define as anti-religious? What would you answer? Okay, so in 1939, the Council for the Coalition of Hebrew Youth was founded, And this was known as the movement of Canaanism, or the Canaanites. And they grew not from the left, they grew from the right. And they based their ideas on revisionism of Jabotinsky, which led to the Etzel, the Lehi, Likud, Cherut, Begin, even Netanyahu. They were a very small movement. They only had about 24 members at their height, but they included a lot of highly influential individuals, intellectuals and artists, which had a large influence on a large amount of people within Palestine. In 1943, one of their founders, who was a poet named Yonatan Ratosh, he wrote the following: "The Council for the Coalition of Hebrew Youth calls upon you as a Hebrew, as one for whom the Hebrew homeland is a homeland in actuality, not as vision, nor as desire, and not as a solution for the Jewish question, nor," remember I said 1943, this is the gas chambers of Auschwitz are burning, "nor as a solution to nor as a solution to cosmic questions, and not as a solution to the variegated neurosis of those stricken by the diaspora. As one for whom the Hebrew language is a language in actuality and practicality, a mother tongue, a language of culture and of the soul, the one and only language for emotion and thought, as one whose character and intellect were determined in the Hebrew reality." I'll skip a little bit. "As one who, despite the best efforts of rootless parents, teachers, statesmen, and religious leaders, could not be made to like and affiliate with the shtetl and the history of diaspora, the pogroms, the expulsions, and the martyrs, whose natural estrangement from all prophets of Zionism, the fathers of Hebrew literature in the Hebrew tongue, and the diaspora mentality and the diaspora problem cannot be expunged." So they saw themselves as radically different from Jews. What did they stand for, these Canaanites? So they said that the state of Israel that they wanted to create should be a Hebrew state and not a solution to the Jewish question. So they completely dissociated themselves from Judaism, which they saw as a diaspora mentality, okay? You could be a Jew anywhere. So you could be a Jew in Poland, despite the fact that at that stage Germans would kill you for being a Jew in Poland. You could be a Jew in London. You could be a Jew in Brooklyn. But in the land of Palestine, if you wanted to be connected to the land, you didn't have to be a Jew. You could be a Hebrew. And a Hebrew could be someone who respected or even kept the Jewish religion, but a Hebrew could also be an Arab as well. And they saw themselves as very much connected to the land of Canaan, a land that was connected to the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. They saw themselves very much as tillers of the land, of developers of the land, and they also saw themselves in some way as ancient warriors, in the way that the ancient Egyptians or the Assyrians were warriors. They were warriors that would join the Palmach, and they would, unlike the Jews that were being led to the gas chambers, here were Hebrews that would stand up and that would fight for their land. And of course, they were vehemently opposed to the ideas of Zionism. Zionism standing for a Jewish homeland, okay, a homeland based on Judaism for the Jews. One of the founders was a sculptor known as Yitzhak Daniel. He was born in Berlin in 1916. He moved to Palestine with his family in 1923. His parents were doctors and they opened up a hospital in Tel Aviv, which was handy because the morgue came in, was very cool and became very useful. And Danziger used this as his studio when the morgue wasn't being used by dead people. Before he would come to use the morgue, he went off to London, where he studied at the Fine Arts School, Slade Fine Arts School, which is associated to the University College of London. There he did some studying, but he also he also had a large how should I say, a large and pleasant student life where he met a string of lovers. One of these lovers was a woman called Marion Eddy, who was the daughter of a Scottish judge and a Burmese Muslim woman. Apparently she was very beautiful, and he had an affair with her. He later on, he married a couple, he had other affairs as well, and he had several children with several women. As I mentioned, in 1938, he moved back to Tel Aviv, and he was commissioned by, he was already fairly well known at that stage, he was commissioned by the Hebrew University to produce a statue which would be fitting for the university. And what he produced was a famous statue, the statue of Nimrod, which if you want to see it, you can see it today, not at the Hebrew University, you can see it at the Israel Museum. And in the statue, Nimrod is portrayed as a man-beast with a prominent sense and sex organs. By the way, if you look carefully, you might see his sex organ is uncircumcised, as you might expect. A hunter warrior whose bow has become his backbone. Danziger took the hawk on Nimrod's shoulder from Egyptian art, underscoring the link between his sculpture and the ancient pagan world that we talked about of Egypt and Mesopotamia. The absence of legs likens the figure to an archaeological find. Of course, this wasn't an archaeological find, it was a sculpture, as does the reddish sandstone that is found in Petra. And Nimrod became a symbol for youngsters at this time, 1939, until the establishment of the State of Israel. And they saw this as an expression of native identity based solely on ancient geographic heritage, the heritage of ancient land, of the Canaanites, and the warrior figure of Nimrod. I didn't want to finish on Nimrod. We mentioned Abraham, who took a different approach. Instead of rebelling against God, Abraham decided to form a covenant with God. And in the next clip, we can find out how he did that.
מוכן?
כן, נו.
אבל שלא ייפול התופח.
שמעאל, אני לא אוהב את המשחק הזה.
אל תדאג, יא איציק, זה רוגטקה.
אה? לא, אל תדאג, אני בטוח שהם יסכימו. יצחק, ישמעאל! בואו! אלוהים רוצה שנכרות איתו ברית!
אתה בטוח שזה מה שהוא אמר, יא בבא?
אבא, אי אפשר לעשות אולי איזה כיף מיוחד, איזה משהו כזה...
לא, 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 אתם צריכים להיות שמחים! זה יהיה סימן ההיכר של עמנו!
אין סימנים אחרים? אולי זה עגיל באוזן? כן, כן, עגיל באוזן, זה מעולה. אבל בצד שמאל, בצד ימין זה משהו אחר.
מה? כן, כן, אני אגיד להם. אלוהים הבטיח לי שאם נעשה את זה, הוא ירבה את זרענו.
אתה באמת לא רואה את הסתירה בהבטחה הזאת?
מה אתם רוצים? לעורר את חרון אפו של אלוהים?
לא, אם ככה זה שהוא רגוע, אני בטח לא רוצה לראות אותו כועס.
בואו, אחריי. איפה יש פה איזה סלע? תריח אותו?
עכשיו?
בטח עכשיו, למה לחכות? זהו, תספור עד 3. 1, 2...
מה? הוא אמר שהוא התכוון לזית. שנחתוך כמה זיתים, נשים בסלט עם קצת לימון.
נכון, נכון, גם אני שמעתי זית. פעמיים הוא אמר זית.
רגע. זית? זית. שים אותו. ספור עד 3.
1... אבא, מה לעשות עם הכיפה?
לא יודע. שים אותה על הראש.
Okay, that's it for this evening. You can all unmute yourselves.